Horses that buck like wildfire don't wait for invitations. They fling riders skyward, hooves striking the air with thunderous warnings. And in that split second before you hit the dirt, you learn something true. Some beasts aren't meant to be tamed. 20 years, Sheriff McAllister had said, voice low as river gravel. 20 years no man stayed aboard that stallion. But today the whole town of Red Cloud Ridge was gathered at the fairgrounds, breathing in dust and sun, daring any soul to try. She stood at the rail, sunburned fingers white around the splintered wood. Miss Clara Bell Montgomery, daughter of the richest rancher for 50 miles, her skirts swaying like corn silk in a breeze, lips curved in a challenge. Behind her, banners snapped, children clamored for sugar sticks, and perspiration glistened on horses' flanks. That wild Mustang, Jet, reared in the chute, nostrils flaring, eyes bright as embers. I promise, Clara Bell called out, voice clear above the murmur. I'll marry the man who can stay on that horse. Her laughter rang, equal parts daring and mirth. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A wealthy match, a bold wager, nothing more. But promises like that have gravity. They pull at a person's pride and their future both, until one mistake can tip the scales. Clara Bell felt it in her chest, a tightening of possibility as her father's gaze pinned her like a hawk. He stood by the judge's platform, ebony cane tapping, face stone set beneath his Stetson. He'd granted her freedom until she made this promise. Now he watched the chute's gate, anticipation and dread crossing his lined features. The first rider was a lean cowhand from the Circle Bar. He swung up, pant legs tucked tight, hat tilted to catch the sun. The gate swung open, and Jet shot out like an arrow. For 8 heartbeats the man clung on, hips pumping, knees splayed, hat flying off in a dust swirl. Then gravity spoke. He hit ground with a thud, rolled free, and stumbled to his feet, face white as chalk. The crowd cheered, half in relief, half in applause. Clara Bell's eyes were steady, but she bit her lower lip. One by one, they tried. The schoolteacher's brother, the banker's nephew, a lonesome drifter 2 towns over. Each gave their all, leaning forward, whispering to the stallion, but each ended up kissing dirt. The judge counted their seconds, slapped the board, and shook his head. Not one had stayed until the bell. Clara Bell mounted the platform, skirts swishing. The murmurs hushed into a hush. She held out her hand for the reins, fingertips trembling not from fear but from the power of her own promise. Around her, the world narrowed to that dusty corral, the hot wood under her palms, the wildness of Jet's black coat glinting under high sun. Then the drifter appeared. He didn't ride in or swagger. He walked up the dirt road, boots scuffed, coat dust-speckled, hat pulled low. No one recognized him. He drifted into Red Cloud Ridge only that morning. They said he came from Colorado, said nothing at all. Townsfolk gave him room as he approached the rail. Clara Bell watched him over her fan of chestnut curls, pulse quickening. Not because she feared for her honor, but because she felt something shift. The drifter stopped beside her, silent, eyes hidden in shadow. He spat tobacco onto the ground, then tipped his hat. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light that fell across his jaw, a jaw set with calm she'd never seen in any of the challengers. He didn't smile, he didn't speak. He only scanned Jet as if measuring every sinew and fleck of muscle, then met Clara Bell's gaze. A hush fell deeper. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows climbing. You? He asked, voice taut. The drifter nodded once, tipping his hat again. He turned, brushed dust from his pant leg, and climbed into the chute with the quiet assurance of a man who'd spent his life taming things far wilder than horses. Clara Bell felt a thrill she couldn't name. Hope, perhaps, or the weight of her own promise. Around them, the crowd held its breath. The world stood poised on the brink between triumph and disaster, between the future she had written in a single bold vow and the unknown that now walked into the ring. And in that pregnant silence, she realized that promises, once spoken, can't be taken back. They become tides that pull you forward, dragging your heart along. As the chute gate creaked open, sending Jet thunderhoofed into the corral, Clarabelle Montgomery gripped the rail so tightly her knuckles turned white. The drifter leaned forward, spine straight, eyes fixed on the wild black blaze before him, and the sun glinted off the buckle at his side, an old brand she thought she recognized. The bell rang. Dust exploded around them. Clarabelle exhaled. In the pounding of her own blood, she heard her future begin to gallop. Horses that buck like wildfire don't wait for invitations. They fling riders skyward, hooves striking the air with thunderous warnings. And in that split second before you hit the dirt, you learn something true. Some beasts aren't meant to be tamed. Today the grandstand at Red Cloud Ridge Fairgrounds sagged under the weight of townsfolk hungry for spectacle. The midday sun carved deep shadows beneath broad-brimmed hats and painted the dusty arena in harsh contrast. Clarabelle Montgomery stood at the rail, her heart pounding like a war drum. Behind her, the roar of the crowd flickered between excitement and doubt. She'd grown up on her father's sprawling ranch, sun-cracked earth and rolling pastures stretching to the horizon, but never on the back of a wild stallion. Yet she'd made her vow beneath the ponderosa pines just that morning. "I'll marry the man who can stay on that horse." Her voice had carried through the timbered grove, clear and fearless as a shot. No playful jest, no idle flirting. She meant every word. That promise had been a lightning bolt in a calm sky. Her father's jaw had clenched when he heard it, eyes cold beneath his tall hat. Town gossip would spread faster than prairie fire, and Clarabelle knew the gamble she'd placed not only on Jet, a raven-black Mustang with a streaked white blaze, but on every man foolish enough to answer her challenge. Now Jet pawed the ground inside the chute, nostrils flaring with each breath, muscles rippling under sweat-dark hide. His eyes blazed with defiance, green in the sun's glare. The chute gate creaked open, and he burst forth, hooves churning dust into a golden haze. The first rider flew off like a thrown stone, hat tumbling after him. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whipped by that familiar thrill of danger. Behind the rail, Clarabelle's satin cuff tightened around her wrist. She'd watched dozens of men try, cowboys with backs bent by years on the range, bank clerks who'd never swung a leg over a saddle, drifters with more pride than sense. All had fallen, face first, into the hard-packed earth. Each time, she'd felt a pang, sympathy, yes, but also a sharpened hope that the next man might succeed, that the echo of her vow might find its match. She remembered the morning mist on the pasture, the way Jet's mane had whipped like storm clouds, the way his spirit had drawn her rather than repelled. When she'd slid from her father's carriage and approached the stallion, he'd reared with that familiar roar, but she'd stood her ground, unafraid. That's when she'd made her promise, voice ringing through the valley. "Tame him and he and I are yours." The murmur of speculation had swelled at the general store, then boiled over in the saloon, where cowhands polished glasses and eyed her like she was both prize and curse. Some had scoffed, others leered, but none dared meet her gaze. No one knew why she'd risked her reputation on a beast no one could break. Now the sun hovered at its zenith, and Clarabelle felt time slow. She closed her eyes, inhaled the hot air scented with hay and horses. Beneath the brim of her bonnet, her heart settled into a steady rhythm. There would be suitors enough, until the quiet drifter stepped into the dust. He appeared at the edge of the arena like a ghost from a distant horizon. Hat low over his eyes, coat the color of faded denim, boots caked in yesterday's trail dust. He didn't push through the crowd or call for attention. He simply walked to the rail, shoulders relaxed, gaze fixed on Jet as if reading the stallion's thoughts. A ripple ran through the spectators. The judge, an older man in a starched vest, leaned forward, squinting. Even her father straightened in his seat, ebony cane tapping a silent question. The drifter's presence changed the air. It went from perfumed carnival to hush before a storm. Clarabelle stepped back, giving him room, pulse quickening with a thrill she hadn't felt for all the brave fools who'd tried before. The drifter paused beside her, hat tipped in quiet greeting. He said nothing, only met her gaze with cool, unreadable eyes. She saw curiosity there, not contempt. Respect, even. Behind them, Jet pawed once more and tossed his head, nostrils flaring at the stranger's calm demeanor. The world held its breath. Clarabelle felt the weight of her promise settle on her shoulders like a mantle. No longer hers alone, but theirs both. A bead of sweat ran down her temple. She swallowed, forced her voice steady. "You're welcome to try," she said, the words carrying farther than she intended. The drifter tipped his hat again, then walked toward the chute gate. His footsteps stirred the dust, and every eye followed him. The judge stood, clearing his throat. "Name and time, stranger," he called. "Step up if you dare." The drifter paused inside the chute, hand resting on Jet's flank. For a moment, horse and rider measured each other. Then, without fanfare, he slipped into the saddle with the ease of someone who'd spent his life perched atop restless backs. Clarabelle's breath caught at the sight. No boastful flourish, just quiet competence. The judge raised the bell. Clarabelle pressed her palm to her bonnet, heart fluttering like a songbird. The stallion snorted, muscles tensing. The world contracted to rumble of hooves, the crack of leather, and the silent promise that had drawn them here. As the bell rang, Jet bolted, and the drifter sat deep in the saddle. Dust exploded like fireworks. Clarabelle felt the ground shift beneath her as the stallion bucked, spun, and reared, not out of cruelty, but out of freedom tested and challenged. And in that instant, she knew this night would mark the turning of a tide. For her, for the drifter, and for the promise that would bind them both. Jet's thunderous hooves still echoed in Clarabelle's ears when the first rider crested the ridge that afternoon. A dozen strong and grim-faced, dust curling at their mounts' flanks like storm clouds low to the ground. Word had spread of the drifter who dared ride the wild stallion and live. Now they came for retribution. Ranchers, cowhands, and one broad-shouldered marshal sent by the county. Each felt entitled to demand satisfaction, and each believed the drifter would pay with blood. Clarabelle waited by the tin watering trough, heart hammering beneath her cotton dress. The fairgrounds lay half-abandoned now, stalls empty, bystanders gone home to supper. Only the ridge road was alive, horses flicking tails, riders silent as vultures. She saw her father at their edge, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. He carried his ebony cane but wore no hat, an unspoken sign that today, business would be done bareheaded. The drifter rode Jet in circles near the chute, a hand loose at his hip where the leather of his saddle dipped low. He met Clarabelle's eyes once, nodding, then focused forward. The stallion snorted, eyeing the newcomers with wary intelligence. Tension twined through the air like barbed wire. This was no longer sport but showdown. The marshal, tall and lean, unslung his rifle and let it rest across his saddle horn. "Step down," he called, voice flat as the plains. "You have a duty to answer for your trespass. You claimed her promise, yet no binding contract exists in law." Clarabelle's father spat into the dirt. "A woman's vow holds more weight in these parts than any piece of paper," he said, his voice cracked with anger. "He broke my daughter's promise, stole her future. That's enough to see him hung." The drifter eased Jet to a stop, boots still in the stirrups, hands calm. He said nothing at first, simply watched the circle of men tighten around him. The sun dipped lower, flame-bright and unforgiving, casting long shadows that danced across the parched ground. One of the ranchers, a heavy-set man with a grizzled beard, tightened the reins and spurred his horse forward a pace. "You owe her," he spat. "You promised to ride that horse for a bride. Only one way to settle this." Another man, a youth fresh from town and yet armed with swagger, cocked his pistol but against his saddle. "We ain't got to listen to sheriff's orders if we see fit," he sneered. "We settle this now." Clarabelle stepped between her father and the marshal, voice trembling but fierce. "Stop!" She met each man's glare. "This isn't how we do things." She placed a hand over her heart. "He saved me from certain death. He honored my promise under the sun. And you call that betrayal?" Her father's eyes flashed. "You know nothing of responsibility, girl. You've dangled your word as bait. Now he must pay." The marshal dismounted and motioned to the ranchers to do the same. They obeyed, boots thudding on the hardpan. He drew his rifle and rested it atop his saddle horn. "By my authority," he declared, "this man will step down. We'll take him to court. Give him a fair trial." The drifter slid from Jet's back, boots hitting the earth with measured grace. Jet stamped and whinnied, restless at the sudden lull of activity. The drifter patted the colt's neck and turned to face the marshal, father, and men who'd come to strip him of his triumph. Before he spoke, his gaze flicked to Clara Belle. She stood pale beneath her bonnet, hands clenched at her sides. She had never looked more beautiful, resolute, defiant, her chestnut ringlets loose around her shoulders like a river of fire. In that moment, the drifter knew what he must do. His voice was low, almost gentle. "I will go with you," he said. "But know this, I stand by what I did. I won her hand fair and square." He met the marshal's eyes. "I ask only that no man draw a weapon if I refuse to dismount." The marshal nodded, though his jaw remained tight. "Agreed. But if you pull iron, we'll answer with lead." He motioned for the deputies at his back, who raised muskets in silent threat. Clara Belle's father swung his cane, wood cracking the air. "We'll see whose steel speaks louder." He aimed at the drifter's side, finger itching near a hidden colt. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dust and wildflowers, the smell of everything precious about this land. The ranchers tensed, hands creeping toward holsters. The drifter reached slowly for his coat, drawing a worn leather flask instead of a gun. He tipped it to his lips, then held it out flat, a gesture of peace and challenge. "Come," he said, voice steady. "Let's talk this through. No more guns. Let's settle this as men, not brutes." A murmur rippled through the circle. The marshal lowered his rifle an inch, as if weighing the weight of bullets against words. Clara Belle stepped forward, her voice rising but soft. "If it must be decided, let it be by my choice." She raised her chin. "Not by your fear, nor your guns." Silence fell. Even Jet quieted, leaning close to the drifter's hip. The ranchers exchanged glances, some wary, some uncertain. At stake was more than honor. It was the fragile balance between law and mercy, between the old ways of quick draw and the new promise of respect. Her father's shoulders slumped, cane drooping. He regarded his daughter, then the drifter, eyes searching. The marshal's hand hovered near his rifle, but he did not lower it. The sun dipped below the ridge, casting them all in a blood-red glow. Clara Belle stepped fully between them, voice unwavering. "I choose him," she declared. "He tamed Jet. He won my promise. No court, no mob can overturn what I gave of my own will." Her words rang like a bell. The drifter straightened, eyes on Clara Belle's. The ranchers faltered, some lowering hands from holsters, others glancing away. The marshal looked at the father, then at Clara Belle, then at the drifter, and finally nodded. He lowered his rifle. "Very well," he said, voice gravelly. "By the authority vested in me," he paused, offering a wry half-smile, "and by the law of Red Cloud Ridge, the promise stands." The ranchers shuffled, tension draining like wind from a balloon. The father's cane clattered as he struck the ground, wordless acceptance passing between him and his daughter. The ranchers remounted, dust swirling back into the evening sky. The drifter tipped his hat to Clara Belle and then to her father. He helped her into the saddle before mounting Jet himself. As they rode together across the fairground's bare earth, the wind softened around them, carrying away the threat of violence and leaving only the promise of a new beginning. Behind them, the marshal spurred his horse, riding out ahead of the closing dusk. The ranchers followed, scattering like storm-tossed skeins of dust. Clara Belle leaned into the drifter's shoulder, and Jet broke into a soft lope toward home, toward a future shaped by courage, by mercy, and by the quiet strength of a promise kept. The afternoon sun had eased behind drifting clouds when Clara Belle followed the drifter down the worn path that led from the fairgrounds into the sheltering cottonwood grove. Jet walked calmly beneath them, hooves stirring stray leaves and small stones. The bustle of the crowd, the clatter of spurs and shouts, the tension of gun barrels. Everything seemed a distant echo here, as if swallowed by the grove's soft shade. They found a fallen log at the grove's heart, its surface smoothed by seasons of weather and bare knees. Clarabelle slid from the saddle first, her skirts rustling like wind through wheat. The drifter dismounted beside her, boots settling on moss-flecked earth. For a long moment they simply stood, two souls caught between the roar of the world and the hush of shared solitude. Clarabelle uncoiled her skirts and sat on the log, hands folded in her lap. She watched him ease Jet's reins into the horse's mouth, whispering a soft name she didn't know. He ran a gloved finger along Jet's mane, then let his hand fall to the stallion's flank, feeling its muscle beneath the hide. The gesture was quiet reverence, as if he'd known this beast longer than the week they'd ridden together. She cleared her throat. "You've never told me your name," she said softly, voice almost lost among the rustle of leaves. "I don't even know where you came from." He turned, eyes steady in the dim light. "Richard Hale," he answered after a heartbeat. "But people call me Hale." He slid a hand into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver locket, tarnished at the edges. "This belonged to my sister." He unclasped it and let it hang on its chain, then closed it again. "She died taming horses, too. Cared for them more than folk thought proper." His jaw clenched once, memory weighing heavy. "I came west to honor her." Clarabelle lifted her gaze to him, sunlight flickering on the locket when he held it out. "She must have been brave," she said, "to face horses the way you did today." Hale rested the locket against his palm. "Braver than I am," he said quietly. "She believed that if you treated a horse with kindness, spoke softly, moved gently, it would return the favor. Most cowboys only know the crack of a whip." He traced a finger across the wood grain of the log, as if mapping old scars. "Jet was like her, untamed, free. I promised more to him than a rope." Clarabelle studied his face. The curve of his cheekbones, the slight crease at the corner of his eye where laughter had once lived, the shadow of stubble on his jaw. He wasn't a hero in stories. No flamboyant gestures, no booming declarations of love. His courage lay in quiet choice. To meet fear with calm, to offer respect where others offered shackles. She rose and stepped closer until their shoulders brushed. "I've always been told a lady's promise is law," she said, voice low. "I was afraid when you climbed into that chute. Afraid you'd be just another broken rider." She brushed a stray curl from her forehead. "But you kept your word. Not because you owed me, but because you chose to." He took her hand, calloused but gentle, and turned it over, studying the pale lines of her palm. "You chose to give your word," he said. "That took bravery too." He stepped forward and tucked a loose curl behind her ear, fingertips lingering against her temple. "I wasn't riding for a bride. I was riding for something I believed in." Her breath caught, heart thudding in the hush. She could feel the pulse of the grove, slow and steady, echoing in her veins. For so long she'd lived within the confines of her father's ranch and the town's expectations. She'd worn her fine dresses like armor and let her voice ring out only when she dared. Now, beneath the cottonwoods, she felt her armor fall away. He leaned down so their foreheads touched, eyes closing as if to seal a promise forged in silence rather than speech. Their breaths mingled in the cool shade. For the first time in her life, Clarabelle felt not the weight of her station or the echo of gossip, but the simple truth of being seen, for kindness given and courage shared. Somewhere beyond the grove, a bird called once, then drifted into silence. Jet shifted his weight, nostrils flaring, as if eager to set off again. Hale gently stroked the stallion's neck, then released Clarabelle's hand. She stood, and he did too, matching her step as they circled back toward the trail. Before they emerged into open sky, Clarabelle turned. "Will you stay?" she asked, voice firm but tender. "Not just until the wager's done, but here with me?" Hale paused, eyes meeting hers with quiet joy. He slipped the locket into her palm, cold metal warm against her fingers. "If you'll have me," he said, "I'll stay as long as I draw breath." She closed her hand around the locket, nodding. Then let's ride home together. They mounted in unison, the grove's dappled light playing across their figures. Jet rose, shaking his mane, and they set off down the path. A pair shaped by promise and choice, tethered not by contract but by something deeper. A shared understanding that kindness, once offered, can tame not only beasts, but the hearts of those brave enough to believe. The morning after the grove, Red Cloud Ridge woke to a softer light. The sun hovered low, gilding porches and corrals in pale honey. Word had already spread that Clarabelle and Hale intended to wed under the cottonwoods where his horse awaited. The fairgrounds lay empty now, Jet's chute silent, its boards marked by the thunder of hooves and the echo of promises kept. Clarabelle watched Hale tether Jet at the edge of the grove. His back was straight, shoulders no longer burdened by doubt, but eased by certainty. In his hands he held fresh wreaths of wildflowers, yellow daisies and blue lupin, picked at dawn. He lifted one to her, brushing the petals against her cheek. She closed her eyes, inhaling the soft scent of prairie bloom, and let a smile lift the corners of her lips. They walked together toward the small clearing where the logs still lay, smoothed by their shared confession. Hale knelt and placed the wreath atop the log, then turned to Clarabelle. She stepped forward, the hem of her skirt fluttering like a shy butterfly's wing. In his eyes she saw gratitude, not for her station or her wealth, but for her courage to believe in something gentler than gold or land. In him. He reached into his coat and drew out a simple silver band, unadorned save for the initials C+H etched inside. Butterflies rose in Clarabelle's chest as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit snugly, a quiet promise that glinted in morning light. She lifted his hand to her lips and whispered, "I'll love you till the prairie blooms no more." The words trembled on her breath, but held the strength of all they'd endured. Hale rose, brushing dust from his trousers, and took her hand. They walked back along the path, stepping past Jet, whose ears flicked forward in alert curiosity. The grove's shade gave way to open sky, and behind them the ridge rolled out like an old friend welcoming them home. By midday, the townsfolk had gathered at the edge of the cottonwoods. Neighbors who'd once doubted, ranchers who'd hovered at the fairground's edge, even the marshal who'd threatened arrest. All now stood silent witness to this new beginning. Clarabelle's father stood in the front row, ebony cane held loosely at his side. His hat was off, and for the first time in memory he smiled with genuine warmth. Clarabelle and Hale paused before the crowd. She raised her free hand in greeting. He dipped his hat and offered a slight bow. No preacher stood among them, no formal ceremony awaited. Instead, Hale lifted his voice, calm and sure. "By my word and her vow," he said, "we are bound not by town law nor gold, but by something truer, kindness given and returned." He turned to Clarabelle. "I promise to ride with you through every storm, to stand by you whether the trail winds easy or hard." He drew in a steady breath. "And I promise, each dawn I'll come for you, as I did for Jet, with respect, patience, and love." Clarabelle's chest rose and fell with emotion. She touched the ring at her finger. "And I promise," she replied, "to honor your choices, to match your courage with my own, and to believe in the gentle strength that brought us here." Her voice wavered only once, then found its resolve. "Together, we will tame no one, but we will learn from each other, and grow stronger for it." A hush fell, then the crowd broke into soft applause. Hands cupped to catch the moment, hats raised high. Hale guided Clarabelle into Hale's arms, and they shared their first kiss as partners, not as prize and champion, but as equals bound by trust. When the applause faded, Hale led Clarabelle back toward the ranch road. They mounted Jet together, her skirt swept aside so she could perch astride the saddle behind him. He adjusted her gently, and Jet stepped forward, hooves kicking up small puffs of dust that caught the sunlight like motes of gold. As they rode away, Clarabelle leaned her head against Hale's back, listening to the steady rhythm of Jet's gait. Behind them, Red Cloud Ridge receded. A town forever changed by a simple wager and the brave heart of a drifter who believed in something better. Years later, Travelers passing under the cottonwoods would find a small wooden sign, Montgomery, Hale. The letters carved by Hale's own hand. Beneath it, a patch of wildflowers bloomed in spring, a living wreath in honor of the place where a promise, once spoken, had blossomed into a life together. At dusk, Clarabelle and Hale would sit on their porch, hers in a simple dress, his in worn denim, hands entwined as they watched Jet graze at the edge of their land. No more challenges awaited. They had tamed nothing save their own doubts, and what remained was richer than any prize. A home built on the gentle strength of mercy, respect, and love that would outlast all storms.